Birthdays had always carried a quiet kind of magic. They were supposed to be the one day when love felt simple, when the people who mattered most showed you that you were worth celebrating. But that illusion shattered in an instant. So what was meant to be a small moment of joy turned into a cruel reminder that expectations can be dangerous. The excitement that built up for days before quickly turned into embarrassment when the person you thought would understand you most made you feel foolish for even hoping. That small, hopeful question about a gift wasn't about wanting something expensive. It was about wanting to be seen, to be valued, to feel like you mattered in someone's world. But instead of love, there was laughter, a kind of mocking laughter that didn't just sting, it lingered. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, dismissive, the kind that makes your chest tighten because you realize it's not a joke to them. It's you who's the joke. Standing there, hearing the words, something inside began to sink. It wasn't about the gift anymore. It was about the meaning behind it, the care, the thought, the small proof that you were worth remembering. The room felt colder, time slower, and that moment burned into memory like a scar you can't see but never forget. For days after that sound, the laughter played on repeat in the mind. It wasn't just noise, it became a symbol of everything that was wrong. It said more than words ever could, echoing that quiet message, you don't matter as much as you thought. And it hurt deeply. Because when that message comes from someone who's supposed to protect you, it cuts sharper than any insult from a stranger. The kind of pain that doesn't make you cry right away. It just builds inside until you start to feel small around them, until you start convincing yourself that maybe you were expecting too much. That single moment turned something warm into something cold. The next few days felt empty, filled with silence that wasn't peaceful but heavy. Every interaction felt awkward, every attempt at conversation forced. It was strange how quickly affection could turn into distance. The laughter that seemed harmless to them became a constant echo of rejection, reminding you that love sometimes hurts not because it's absent, but because it's careless. The worst part wasn't even the words. It was how easily they were said, how naturally they came, as if making fun of your feelings didn't mean anything. And that's what stayed. The sound of laughter that lingered long after the moment had passed, the memory that refused to fade, even when you tried to move on. You could laugh too, pretend it didn't matter, but inside, the pain sat quietly, waiting for the next reminder. That was the day innocence was replaced by realization. The moment you learn that sometimes the people who teach you about love are also the ones who make you question it. Pretending not to care became the only way to survive the heaviness that followed. It was easier to wear a mask than to admit how deeply those few moments had hurt. Smiling in front of everyone felt like a quiet act of defiance, a way to prove that nothing had changed, but deep down everything had. Every sound in the house carried an invisible tension. Every silence felt heavier than words. It wasn't anger that settled in, it was disappointment. It's the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you question your worth. The laughter that once filled the house now echoed differently, carrying reminders of that one cruel moment. It replayed during quiet nights, reminding that love could turn cold without warning. Little things that once brought joy, simple conversations, shared meals, small gestures, started to lose meaning. There was a wall now, built not from arguments but from silence. It became easier to withdraw, to keep emotions hidden, to convince yourself that maybe expecting kindness was asking too much. That day kept returning in flashes, how the room felt smaller, how the air felt heavy, how it was easier to laugh along than show the hurt. That silent pretending turned into habit. Acting fine became second nature, but inside a quiet storm kept brewing, a mix of sadness, shame, and something unspoken that no one seemed to notice. Through all this, one pair of eyes saw everything without saying a word. The guilt in them was unmistakable. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it was there, in the way meals were placed quietly on the table, in the soft attempts to lighten the atmosphere, in the small, careful glances that tried to apologize without speaking. There's a certain kind of pain that doesn't need words to be understood. It was written in that silence. In that quiet regret that tried to make up for someone else's cruelty. But even that silent comfort couldn't undo the damage. It only made the sadness heavier. Because love was there but powerless. The fear of starting another argument hung over everything. Words were chosen carefully, steps were softer, and everyone pretended nothing was wrong. But the truth lingered in every corner. It was strange how a house could be so full yet feel so empty. That unspoken tension became the new normal. The guilt in those silent glances only deepened the aches because it reminded that someone cared but couldn't protect you when it mattered most. Every day became a quiet act of endurance. On the outside, things looked calm, but underneath was a fragile peace built on avoidance. The laughter that once hurt so much still echoed faintly, but now it was joined by the heavy silence of regret. It wasn't just about a birthday anymore. It was about the slow unraveling of what family was supposed to mean, about realizing that sometimes love is present but helpless, and that silence can be just as painful as words. The days that followed stretched into weeks, each one quieter than the last. Conversations became shorter, glances colder, and the distance that once felt emotional turned into something almost physical. It was easier to stay in separate rooms, to pretend that silence was peace rather than avoidance. The pain no longer showed on the surface. It had settled deep inside, hidden beneath calm expressions and routine. There was no fight, no confrontation, just a slow withdrawal from someone who had once been trusted completely. The hurt had built a wall that neither side seemed brave enough to break down. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about exhaustion, about finally accepting that some people will never understand how much their words can wound. There was no need for arguments or explanations. The silence spoke louder than anything that could be said. The effort to stay invisible became a form of self-protection. It was easier to stop trying, to stop hoping for something that wasn't coming. Days blurred into each other. Mornings started with heavy thoughts and nights ended with unspoken questions. The bond that once felt unbreakable now felt like a memory. The laughter that used to fill the air had vanished, replaced by a quiet that hurt in its own way. It was the kind of silence that didn't bring calm, only reminders of everything that had gone wrong. Then, without warning, the balance shifted. One morning, the sound of pride that once filled the house was replaced by desperation. The person who had mocked now sounded different, uncertain, afraid, vulnerable. It was almost hard to recognize that voice. There was no arrogance, no control, just fear laced with something that sounded like regret. It came in the form of a request. Though it wasn't said directly at first, it lingered in tone, in hesitation, in the way every word carried weight. The same person who once stood tall now seemed smaller, not because of age or weakness, but because pride had finally broken. The moment felt unreal, almost like a reversal of time. It was strange to see the one who once seemed untouchable now standing at the edge of helplessness. There was no satisfaction in it. Only confusion. Watching that change stirred something deep inside, a mix of resentment and pity, of justice and sorrow. The silence between them was now filled with something new, something uncomfortable. It wasn't revenge that came to mind, but reflection. It's a realization of how fragile power truly is. That voice of desperation didn't erase the past, but it showed a different truth, that even the strongest can fall, and that pride often comes before pain. The person who once made others feel small was now learning what it felt like to be powerless. And in that moment, everything shifted. The silence that once hurt now held meaning, and the distance that once felt unbearable became the only thing keeping things from breaking completely. The change was difficult to process. Seeing the same person who once carried pride like armor now struggling to speak felt strange. The words didn't come easily, as if every syllable weighed too much to release. There was hesitation in their tone, the kind that comes when someone finally realizes the damage they've caused. The moment was heavy with something unspoken, regret. The apology wasn't direct, but it was there in the eyes, in the trembling voice, in the way they avoided looking straight ahead. For so long, there had been strength, power, and control, but now all of that had vanished. What stood in its place was vulnerability, the kind that doesn't need words to be understood. Every breath they took seemed like a plea for forgiveness that couldn't be said out loud. The pride that had once built walls was now the same thing, making it hard to admit fault. It wasn't about the situation anymore. It was about everything that had been ignored for years, every moment of silence, every cruel word, every time love had been mistaken for authority. The air between them was thick with all those memories, and in that quiet moment, time seemed to slow down. It was no longer about what was said that day. It was about what had been felt ever since. The struggle to find forgiveness wasn't easy. There was a part that wanted to help, to reach out, to end the tension that had weighed on both sides for so long. But there was another part, the one that still remembered every moment of humiliation and pain. That part couldn't forget how easily laughter had replaced love, how quickly the heart had been dismissed. Standing there, torn between compassion and resentment, felt like standing on the edge of two different worlds. Helping would mean letting go of the pain, but holding back felt like justice, a way to finally make them understand what their actions had done. The memories came rushing back like waves. Every cruel laugh, every cold silence, every night spent wondering why love had to hurt. Those memories made forgiveness feel impossible. And yet, seeing them broken, helpless, stripped of pride, stirred something unexpected. It wasn't satisfaction, it was sadness. A kind of sorrow that comes when you realize that revenge doesn't heal what's been broken. It only mirrors the pain. The heart wanted to forgive, but the mind replayed the moments that caused the wound. There was an internal war between the person who wanted to move on and the one who still needed to be understood. It was clear now that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about deciding what kind of person to be in the face of pain. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything that had never been said. And in that silence lay the hardest truth of all. Sometimes the chance to make things right comes too late. When the damage has already changed both people forever. That moment felt like standing between two versions of the same world, the one before the hurt and the one after. There was a strange mix of emotions, an inner storm of confusion and clarity all at once. The chance to help stood there, heavy and real, like a test of everything that had been learned from the pain. There was power in silence now, power that once belonged to the one who mocked and dismissed. But with that power came a question that burned deep inside. So what kind of person would it be right now? Someone who mirrored the same cruelty, or someone who rose above it? It wasn't an easy thought. The anger still lived quietly inside, not wild or loud anymore, but sharp and constant. The memories refused to fade, the laughter that once shattered confidence, the humiliation that came from being made to feel unworthy. Yet seeing them now so small, so afraid, created a fracture in that anger. The person who had caused so much pain was no longer powerful. They were fragile, desperate, and almost childlike. The sight stirred something unexpected, something close to pity. Not because they deserved it, but because the truth of human weakness was suddenly so visible. It became clear that this was not just a moment of revenge or forgiveness. It was a turning point. The heart ached from the weight of choice. Walking away would be easy, satisfying even, but deep down there was a fear that doing so would make things worse inside, not better. Helping them would not erase the past, but it would mean refusing to become the same kind of person who caused that pain in the first place. Strength wasn't in holding on to resentment. It was in being able to act with dignity when every part of the past screamed not to. When their eyes met, time seemed to pause. The pride that had once filled those eyes was gone, replaced by something raw, fear, regret, maybe shame. For the first time, there was no distance between them, just an unspoken acknowledgement that everything had changed. Tears came, not loud or dramatic, but quiet and slow, like they'd been waiting for years to fall. There was no satisfaction in seeing them cry, only a deep ache. It was strange how pain could shift from anger to empathy in a heartbeat. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something close, a moment of understanding that hurt people often don't realize the depth of what they do until it's too late. Seeing that vulnerability broke something open inside. The decision of what to do next didn't come from the mind. It came from a place much deeper. It's the same place where love and pain often meet. And in that place, strength began to take a different shape, not in revenge, but in choosing compassion even when it wasn't deserved. It was strange how quickly everything could turn. The one who once seemed unshakable now stood waiting, eyes full of fear, voice trembling with helplessness. The roles had reversed completely. Power no longer belonged to the person who used to command it. It belonged to the one who had learned silence and endurance. Watching that change unfold was both satisfying and heartbreaking. There was a quiet understanding that this moment wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. The truth that every action eventually circles back, that cruelty doesn't disappear, it just waits for the right time to be felt again. The silence between them spoke louder than any words could. There was no need for shouting, no need to prove anything. The look on their face said it all, the realization of what they had done. The weight of years of careless words and broken trust finally settling in. It was strange to see someone who once carried so much pride now seem so small, so fragile. The eyes that once dismissed now begged to be seen, to be understood, to be forgiven. But forgiveness isn't something that can be demanded. It has to be earned. And sometimes it never comes at all. Standing there was a deep stillness inside. The anger that had once burned so fiercely had faded into something quieter, something almost peaceful. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about finally being free from the need to be understood by someone who never tried to. For so long, the heart had been chained to that pain, to the memory of being made to feel unworthy. But in that moment, watching the one who caused it crumble, it became clear that real strength wasn't in holding on. It was in letting go. When the time came to decide what to do, the choice wasn't driven by bitterness. It came from a place of calm understanding, a realization that helping didn't mean forgetting, and forgiving didn't mean trusting again. It meant choosing peace over revenge, healing over hate. The decision wasn't made out of love or obligation, but out of the quiet knowledge that sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the cycle that hurt you in the first place. That choice changed everything. It shifted the air, softened the silence, and finally put an end to the years of unspoken resentment. The power dynamic that had once been so one-sided now felt equal, not because things were fixed, but because the emotional weight had finally lifted. The heart that once broke had grown stronger, wiser, calmer, and in that strength came a quiet kind of victory, the kind that doesn't need recognition or apology. It was the moment of realizing that true power isn't in making someone else suffer, it's in refusing to let their cruelty define who you become. From that day forward, nothing was the same. The pain had turned into purpose, and the silence that once hurt became the sound of freedom. In the end, the story wasn't about a birthday or a forgotten gift. It was about the quiet lessons that pain leaves behind. It was about learning that love isn't always gentle, that sometimes the people meant to protect you are the ones who wound you the deepest. But it was also about growth, about finding the strength to rise above what tried to break you. There is a moment in every life when you realize that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom. Not because the person deserves it, but because you deserve peace more than you deserve revenge. The journey from humiliation to healing isn't easy. It's filled with nights of silence, tears that no one sees, and memories that replay until you're strong enough to stop them. But strength doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes with stillness, with choosing kindness when bitterness would be easier, with helping when you could turn away, with proving that pain doesn't define who you become. What once began as heartbreak turned into a quiet victory. It's not the kind that others can see, but the kind that happens deep inside when you finally let go of what hurt you. The one who mocked and belittled may never truly understand the damage done, but that understanding no longer matters. What matters is that the pain didn't destroy, it transformed. It became the reason for strength, the proof of resilience, and the beginning of peace. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not in watching someone fall, but in standing tall without needing their apology. Because healing isn't about them, it's about reclaiming your own story. And in that choice, in that moment of strength, the pain loses its power. It turns into wisdom, and the silence that once felt like punishment becomes the sound of freedom, forgiveness, and the quiet dignity of moving on.